The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Art of Email Marketing, the latest tips for successful campaigns. We appreciate everyone joining us today. Before we start the program, there are just a few housekeeping items that I'd like to review. You may ask questions anytime during the presentation using the online question feature. We'll compile questions throughout the program and then have a Q&A at the end. To use the online question feature, simply click on the Questions tab on the control panel. Type your question into the top box and click on the Send button. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, please use the question feature to get my attention, and I will do my best to resolve the problem. We will be providing you with a recording of the webinar and copy of the PowerPoint slides. Keep an eye on your inbox for a link later today or tomorrow morning. Now let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Emily Garner-Sumner. Emily loves to work with clients to increase their brand recognition, leads, and marketing ROI. Lucky for her, she gets to do that every day as principal of Underscore Creative. Underscore Creative specializes in marketing to schools and libraries. Since the early days of text-only emails, Underscore's team has developed expertise in how design, content, and coding all work together to generate maximum response. From 2002 to 2009, Emily was Director of Marketing and Creative Services for Quality Education Data, where she launched and ran their Creative Services Department, an in-house marketing agency. Prior to focusing on education marketing, Emily held copywriting and account management positions at several North Carolina-based agencies working with clients in the banking, furniture, and agricultural sectors. Emily holds a Master of Library and Information Science from Emporia State University, and as you can see, loves to read, eat donuts, and ride her bike, though rarely all at the same time. I'm excited to learn from Emily, so I will turn the program over to her now.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. I'm excited to be here today and to be talking about one of my most favorite topics, which is email marketing. So we're going to spend the bulk of our time today talking about really what comprises an effective email campaign. And we're also going to touch briefly on what are some calls of action that educators respond best to. Once we've gone through this kind of what I'm calling anatomy of an effective email, we'll briefly look at some coding techniques that work best for email. We'll look at the impact of mobile devices on email marketing and trends that may affect our email strategies in the coming months and year. And then, as Suzanne said, we'll end up with a Q&A, so feel free to send your questions in using that chat panel throughout the presentation, and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end. So to start, I think it's important to understand that there are 5 stages of an email campaign, and that at each of these stages, you've got to engage your recipients in order to get them on to the next stage, and ultimately to act on why it is that you're sending the email. So the first hurdle that you have to overcome is getting your email delivered, so past spam filters and into people's inboxes. Next, you have to prevent people from deleting your message and just moving on with their day, so you need to get it opened. Once you've achieved the open, you need to get folks to read it and be interested in your message. But you're not done. Once they've read it, you need to get them to click and really be engaged in that message, so take the action that you've told them that you want them to take. And then finally, you need to get them to convert. And so that's to take the action that you've asked them to take, and that could be a purchase, a download of a white paper, request more information, or watch a video, whatever it is, whatever the reason was that you sent the message in the first place. So we're going to go through each of these stages and talk about kind of the best practices for each of them and how to get your recipients to move on to the next step and ultimately convert. So starting with delivery, and there's lots of discussion these days about delivery and getting your emails delivered. And the first thing to really understand is that while there are rules for delivery, these rules change daily. And these rules aren't the same for each of the email clients that you're sending into. So Gmail and Yahoo's rules are different than Spam Assassin and Barracuda's rules. They're all evaluating similar things, but the actual algorithms and rules that they use are slightly different across each of the platforms. So there's really no consistency, which as we go through this presentation, you'll see is kind of a rule of thumb through most of what we do with email. So a major factor in getting your email delivered and past spam filters is sender reputation. And that is the spam filter, the receiving server, categorizing your message as being sent from a known spammer or from a reputable source. So if you're sending your emails through Agile, you're in good shape. Agile spends a lot of time and energy making sure that their sender reputation is stellar and that they're getting through as many spam filters as possible, that they're not on any lists of spammers, and they really work hard to make sure everything is in compliance with CAN spam rules so that your message has the best chance of getting past spam filters. If you're sending your house file emails through something like Constant Contact or MailChimp, MyEmma, there's hundreds of email service providers. If you're using a reputable one and one that's well known, you'll see when you read their documentation that they're doing all kinds of things too to make sure that their sender reputations are in good shape and that your messages will get through. So really, the rule of thumb here is to just make sure you're working with a reputable email deployment provider, whether that's one of these online email service providers, ESP, or you're working with Agile. I think probably everyone knows, but it never hurts to reiterate, you never, ever, ever want to copy or import your customer list or prospect list into your Outlook or Gmail and send to hundreds or thousands of people all at one time. That is the best way to not get your emails delivered and also to have your email sending server shut down in about 30 seconds. So again, best thing to do is to work with someone who's spending time and taking the energy to make sure that their sender reputation is good. That said, no matter how good your sender reputation is or how clean your message is, you're not ever going to get through every single spam filter and into every single inbox that you're trying to reach. So what you try to do is it's basically a numbers game. Each of the spam filters assigns points to your message based on a whole variety of things that we're going to look at here in a second. And once that number's been tallied, that number is going to be compared against what number the spam filter is set at to allow messages in. So, for instance, here's a copy of a report from Spam Assassin, which is a really widely used spam filter. And you'll see down here that the score is 4.6. With Spam Assassin, a passing score is on average considered a 5. Administrators of the spam filter can change that, but typically it's set at 5. So this message at 4.6 has a good chance of getting through and being delivered. Obviously, we'd like to get that number as low, below 5 as possible to just increase our chances in case some administrators, particularly as we know in school environments, have those spam filters set at a really low or high, depending on how you look at it, threshold. So schools are really trying to keep out spam. So you may want to try to get that number a little below 4.6 as possible. As I said, every message to one degree or another is going to be categorized as having some spam points. You'll see when you look in this that 0.1 points are assigned for HTML included in the message. Well, you're going to have HTML in your message. If you have a link, that's HTML. If you have a color, that's HTML. If you have an image, that's also going to get you some points taken off. So back to my analogy of it's a numbers game, you really just want to try to include all the elements that you need to for the message to be effective, but keep that number balanced so that you're getting as low a spam score as possible. Here's a couple other things just so you can kind of see how the points work. If you talk about lots of money, that's 0.193 points. However, if you flat out say money back guarantee, that's going to get you a heck of a lot more points at 2, a little over 2. So, it's okay probably to talk about money. That's not too many points, but you really want to stay away from things like money back guarantee. On this link, and as Suzanne said, you'll be getting these slides later today or tomorrow. This link will show you everything that Spam Assassin reviews and the points that they assign to it. So again, while every spam filter works differently and uses a different algorithm and evaluates things slightly differently, Spam Assassin is one of the leading spam filters. And so if you kind of comply with their rules, you're going to be in good shape with most other spam filters. Here's, again, just diving a little deeper. there are hundreds and hundreds of spam flags. So again, you're trying to use as few as possible while still being effective with your message. So these ones I have here on the screen are really some things that you just shouldn't do, mainly because they're spam filter or spam triggers, but also because they're just not really good email best practices. I think the best example of that is the using all caps. No one likes to be shouted at. They're ultimately difficult to read, so don't use them, especially in subject lines. They're really a very big spam filter, all caps in a subject line. Most spam triggers are designated as such because, just being brutally honest here, because spammers who are also pornographers tend to use these things. So they tend to use large fonts. They tend to use a lot of exclamation points. They tend to use all caps and bright red and green fonts. All of these spam triggers are basically deemed that based on spam filters, analyzing messages, seeing what's being used, and starting to learn from what's sent and being marked as spam. So again, these things on the screen are just things that kind of in best practices you shouldn't use, both because it's not very good email and they're spam triggers. What you won't see here is free. So free is definitely a spam trigger. I think everybody probably knows that. But this is a good example of what I mean by balancing your spam triggers with effectiveness. Free is a hugely effective word in getting people to open your message and then once they've opened it to take some action. So free shipping, free white paper, free webinar, free demo. People respond to free. So while it's a spam trigger, we typically tend to use it sparingly so that it's there and effective but not overwhelming and immediately getting put into a spam folder. But because free works, it kind of offsets that we may go into a few extra spam filters than if we didn't use it, but it's going to drive higher response ultimately. So we go ahead and use free, and I don't tend to include it on the list of spam triggers to avoid. A question that we get a lot from clients is about using emoticons, which are the little hearts or smiley faces that you'll see a lot of times in consumer messages. We don't see them so much on the education side of things yet, but you've probably all seen them in your inbox. These are not a spam trigger. They haven't been deemed that yet, so as I mentioned, the rule spam trigger, but right now they're not. My only word of caution about using them is that while most email clients do render them, meaning that it will display the icon, a lot of times it doesn't display the icon that you necessarily specified. So you may have specified a heart, but it may come through as something else different or as a symbol or something kind of wonky. So you just want to be careful that your subject line is still going to be legible and understandable if that emoticon is displayed not exactly how you expected it to. These are 3 more spam triggers that I want to talk a little bit more in depth about, mainly because we see them used a lot, and they're actually quite high points assigned to each one of these. The first one is using one big image, and there's a lot of problems with using one big image, and we'll talk about some of those a little bit later. In the land of spam, it's bad to use one big image because a lot of spammers, legitimate spammers, use one big image. And because a spam filter can't read the image, because it's not text, the spam filter assumes that you're trying to hide something from them and therefore automatically says, this is a spam message, we're not going to let it through. So using one big image is just not a good idea if you're trying to get through spam filters. Shortened URLs like bit.ly or tiny URLs, these can be real convenient to use when you're sending folks to big, long, drawn-out URLs, but they really are a big spam trigger, again, because spammers use them a lot. So now spam filters say anything with a bit.ly in it is going to get caught in our spam filter. We're not going to let it through. And finally, sloppy HTML, especially HTML that comes converted from Microsoft Word or even coded in Microsoft Front Page. Spam filters really don't like Microsoft, so you want to keep anything Microsoft out of your code. That will get you a lot of spam points. You also want to just do clean coding, so even if you haven't converted from Microsoft Word, you've coded from scratch, you want to make sure that things like your all of your tags around your fonts and everything are closed. and just that you have clean, good code in there. And then that will increase your likelihood of getting delivered. So again, here's the link to that Spam Assassin list of what they review and the points assigned to it, and that's a really good thing to check out. Also, Agile, as part of their email order form, has kind of a brief best practices guide that also includes some details about specific spam triggers that you want to try to avoid. So once we've gotten our email safely delivered to people's inboxes, past the server and into an inbox, the next thing we need to do is to get folks to open the message, to not just delete it and move on with their day. So the subject line is really the primary driver of getting someone to open the message. Today's subject lines should be around 50 characters or less, and that's usually about 6 to 8 words is kind of a good rule of thumb. And that, for the most part, will make sure that your subject line is shown in someone's inbox display. Everybody has those set differently, so again, there's no surefire way to make sure your whole subject line is shown. But 50 characters or less is a good rule of thumb. Our mobile displays are obviously much smaller, so if you know you have a high rate of mobile opens, you probably want to keep your subject line even shorter, around 20 to 30 characters. So that's why it's really important to keep kind of your most important and most compelling information, your most relevant information, at the front of your subject line. So math app. If I'm a math teacher and I'm kind of a tech-driven math teacher, then math app is going to catch my attention. If I'm a Colorado teacher, then the CSAP scores is also probably something that's going to catch my attention. But even if I have my inbox set really small, I'm probably going to see math app, and that means something to me and means I'm probably going to spend a little more time looking at that subject line. Same with save on classroom decorations. Save just catches people's eyes, same as like with free, and then classroom decorations tells me exactly what I'm going to be saving on. And if I'm in the market for classroom decorations because I'm planning my back-to-school bulletin boards or whatever, then this is a subject line that's going to appeal to me. The big lips here stand for the classic KISS rule, keep it simple, stupid. People oftentimes think that a subject line is a headline of a traditional print ad. And it's really not. It's really not a place to be clever and cute or even cryptic. You really want to be clear about what this message contains and why people need to care about it, why it pertains to them. So while it's often fun and appealing to do cute and clever subject lines, we really tend to stay away from them. Again, in the consumer market, you'll kind of see more of that, of fun and clever subject lines, and there's certainly something you can test. If in general you have a brand that's very lighthearted and teasing in that way, then it may be something you want to continue in your subject lines. But you always want to be making sure that you're telling people exactly what the contents of this message are. And you don't have very many characters and words to do that in. Because of that, you really shouldn't include your company or your product name in your subject line. It seems like maybe you should, but you don't need to, because your from line is going to be shown in the same location as that subject line. So your from line can contain your company name or a product name, something to identify who it's from. And then you don't need to use your valuable subject line real estate on company and product names. So we're going to look real quickly at 2 subject lines that were sent in by members of the audience. And so our first one is School Improvement and PGP. So first off, this is a nice and short subject line. It's not likely to get truncated very much. It also hits on 2 kind of hot words or hot topics within education right now: school improvement and personal graduation plan. So if I'm an educator and these are things that are on my mind, then this is probably going to catch my attention. What's kind of missing in this subject line, even as nice and short as it is kind of answering that, well, what? What about these topics? Because these are big topics. Is this email about? So again, not being totally familiar with this product, so take this subject line with a grain of salt. We added data analysis for school improvement and PGP. So we're clarifying what components of these 2 topics we're helping with. There's obviously other iterations of this, but the point being, we just want to give a little more context around school improvement and PGP and really give reason for people to want to learn more. Oh, I'm looking for data analysis solutions for school improvement, or I need to streamline my school improvement planning. Those are the types of things that you can wrap around these 2 words to make it a little more compelling. Our next subject line is, are you really ready for TK this fall? So again, this is touching on a pain point, transitional kindergarten, but that brings up a point that was also relevant in the previous subject line, is you really want to make sure that the audience is going to know what your abbreviations and acronyms are. Now, if you've segmented your list really well and you're sending really relevant content, then you can be pretty confident that everybody in your audience is going to know PGP, TK, obviously CCSS for Common Core State Standard. You certainly can use acronyms. You just want to be really sure that you are sending to an audience that's going to know what those are and that it's going to compel them to open the message. Using a question is a really good strategy, especially when you're sending what I would call kind of a plain Jane message that's maybe signed by a sales rep, and that you're really trying to engage someone in a conversation. You do want to be careful that your question is compelling enough to get people to want to find the answer. So, if TK is a really painful topic and people aren't prepared for it, then this is probably a really good subject line. Again, we could clarify it more and take it out of the question format, something like TK prep solution, research-based curriculum. So I'm helping you prepare for TK, and I'm doing that with a research-based curriculum. But back to what I've said earlier, testing is really the best way to know what subject lines your audience is going to respond best to. So I may be looking at this and saying, well, maybe the question isn't the right way to go, but the best way to do to find out truly if it's going to work against a more direct one is to test. So another element that drives opens is pre-header text. And this is 100 to 140 characters, and it appears at the top of your message. So this is a view of an email in a desktop view, and it shows where the pre-header text is. This shows you where the pre-header text shows up on a mobile. So on a mobile device, you get the sender from DICOR, then you get the subject line, save 20%, and then below that is the pre-header. This is an Android device, but the iPhone works very similar. You'll also see that the pre-header appears in the Gmail webmail display. So it shows a smaller, lighter text than the subject line, but it does appear there. So the point with the pre-header is to really just give more descriptive information. So you've got the from line, you've got the subject line, hopefully that's getting people interested, and then that pre-header can just reinforce what they're going to find in the message. So you don't want your pre-header to be exactly the same as your subject line, but you want it to kind of reiterate that same message. If you don't include specific pre-header text, basically what the email systems are doing is just displaying the first 100 to 140 characters of the text that's within your email. And so for a lot of people that view this email in a web browser, and that's not very compelling when you're looking at it on your mobile device or even in the Gmail screen. So you want to use that those first bits of text in your email to give people another reason to open and engage with your message. So a couple more things that can help get opens is some personalization within the subject line. So including someone's name, their school name, or a subject or grade taught. So it could be third grade math apps, or Sally, we've got third grade math apps for you. Again, you want to make sure that the personalization doesn't really increase your character count, and you want to keep any personalization that you're going to use up front in your subject line as something that's really going to drive response. So referencing someone's grade or subject can be a very powerful way to get them to open because it adds relevance. We tend to keep things like a school or district name towards the back of the message because those are often very long. So your whole subject line might become Thomas Jefferson High School, which maybe intrigues some people, but probably not. So we would want to put math apps, especially for Thomas Jefferson High School. So it's a really long subject line, but for folks who see it all, they'll see the Thomas Jefferson High School. For folks where it's truncated, they'll still know that we're talking about math apps. Your from and to also matter. You want to add some personality to those, so don't just send things from Acme School Supplies. Put a person's name there. You don't necessarily have to have everything really going to Tom Smith's inbox if somebody hits reply. You can set up a dummy mailbox or a separate mailbox for that. But when people look at the from, they're more likely to spend a second looking at it if it says Tom Smith, because they're going to be thinking, do I know Tom Smith? Is this a message I need to pay attention to? Than if all they see is Acme School Supply. And then also in the to, make sure that you're sending to Sally Smith versus just Sally@company.com. Again, that will help Sally to feel like this is a personal message, this is a message sent just to her, and is likely to spend a little more time with that subject line than if it just has her email address. So wrapping up opens, the number one advice that I can give you to improve open rates is to test. Simple A/B split tests will tell you a lot, and they're really easy to implement, whether you're sending through Agile or your in-house ESP. You can test totally different subject lines, like we were talking about the question versus the statement. You can switch out just single words, like free versus save or save versus sale. You can test those clever versus straightforward. And you can also test your from name and see what people respond best to. All right, so once someone's open and they haven't deleted your message, the next thing that you want to do is have someone read the message. And you've only got about 3 to 5 seconds for people to actually read your message, and that is not very long. On mobile devices, we see that we get more around 15 seconds, and most best guesses about why that is that because you typically have to scroll on a mobile device. Even when you've made a mobile-friendly email, it just takes a little longer physically to interact with an email on a mobile device. So what are you going to do in those 3 to 5 seconds to get people to respond? The best and first thing you can do is to be relevant. Much like we were talking with the subject lines, you want to be using words and language that appeals to your very specific audience. So I think we all know and understand that district administrators have very different concerns in day-to-day lives than classroom teachers. So even though we may be selling the same product or solution to a district curriculum person versus a classroom teacher, what we're going to talk about is really different. The benefits are really different. The solution is really different. How it's used and why it's being chosen is different. So it's very important to segment your list on things like job title, school versus district, grades taught, subject taught, and even demographics can be a driving force in how you segment. Obviously, if you're using your house file and you know kind of their purchasing, what they've purchased past, how long it has been since they purchased, you can do even more relevance on that to talk about things like renewals or a similar product, to engage on how the product's being used because you know more about them. But Agile's database does have a lot of really valuable demographics that you can use to segment and really target your list. Another thing that may seem straightforward, but potentially if you read back through your emails, you may find that you've been in violation of this as well, is that you want to use really personal language. So rather than, teachers work hard, you want to make it you work hard, or even better, Joanne, you work hard to teach math or algebra to your students. So pulling in that name personalization, again, the subjects and grades taught, and really making your email, even though it's sent as a bulk, as personal and relevant as possible to the person receiving it. So when we go about creating an email, we follow kind of a general outline for what tends to work. And that starts with the headline. So we've already gone over the subject line and the pre-header text, which are both very important. But once we get to the body of the email, the headline is often the first thing that people see because it's usually bigger and it's at the top of the message. And so your headline really needs to answer, why are you sending this to me? Why do I need to spend any time with this message? Your subhead, which is typically a little bit smaller font and below the headline, provides some additional information on what's in this for me, why should I keep reading. And then close on the heels of that should be your first call to action, because that's why you want people to be reading this, is to respond to that call to action. And you need to be really clear about what you want people to do. The body, which is typically scanned by people, because again, we're talking about 3 to 5 seconds here, so it's a good place to use bullet points, to keep your sentences really short, to keep your paragraphs very short. Go against what you learned in grade school and have a paragraph that's literally one sentence. You don't have to have 2 or 3 sentences to make a paragraph in an email. You want to keep things really scannable, and so short paragraphs, short sentences, and bullets really help with that. And that body should provide some supporting points, usually benefits of your product or solution. What are folks going to get out of this? Why is it better? Within that body, you should include a link. You could also include the call to action, because the next part of this outline is that you're going to reiterate and provide the final call to action. So that could be kind of nested with the body or be kind of a standalone paragraph or a call out. But you do want to reiterate the call to action at the bottom of the message. And then finally, you've got the footer, which contains your CAN-SPAM compliant address and phone number. And then we tend to keep social media icons and links in the footer, which might seem counterintuitive or controversial compared to what you may have heard. But in most messages that we're sending out, we're really trying to drive people to an action. Again, whether that's to buy, download a white paper, register for a seminar. And we want them to stay focused on that and focus on that click, that call to action. So we tend to keep the social media links at the bottom of the message rather than having them up at the top, taking up that kind of valuable real estate. If you're sending a newsletter or some sort of branding message that doesn't have a really specific call to action, then having your social media links up top makes sense, because it offers a reason for people to click, and it helps engage them with your company. So, typically we tend to keep them at the bottom for most really clear call to action messages, and put them at the top for more branding messages. Oh, I think okay, so what about images? So we've talked about in that outline is mostly text-based, and design and layout do really matter in getting response. This is becoming increasingly so because on mobile devices, images are automatically downloaded. They're not blocked like they are on most desktop devices. And as we'll see in a minute, the number of mobile opens and reads is really increasing, even among educators. So we do want to pay attention to design and photos and images, because for those folks who see the images, it can really enhance the experience and drive response. In particular, buttons, and this is something that you can really test. The color, shape, and size of buttons and the placement of them can really make a big impact on response. We've seen tests where the blue button way outperforms the red button, or saying free demo versus request demo really drives response. So again, testing buttons, but you really, for your call to action, want to consider having a button in your message. On mobile devices, it makes it easier to click because we're using our finger and the screen is small, so a big button makes it much easier to click than just a text link. And then even in a desktop environment, that button is an eye-catching, easy way to see the call to action. One thing we don't want to do is keep any really important content in images, because we're still having a lot of people get their emails on desktop computers where the images are blocked. So you don't want to put your headline in an image. You don't want to put your call to action only in a button. Putting it in a button is fine, but you also want to reiterate it in the HTML text. And definitely any images you use, you want to use alt text. And here's an example of an Agile email that uses alt text in one image, but not in another. So the button, request a demo, has the alt text. So when this email was received on a desktop computer, that button was not downloaded, but I could still see you want me to request a demo. The image on the right does not have the alt text, which we would recommend using, but in this case, it's actually not really that big a deal that it doesn't have alt text, because the image is in the right corner. My eye is naturally drawn to the red subhead, to the red headline and subhead, as well as the button. And the fact that nothing's happening over there on the right is really not that big a deal. It's probably not going to affect response at all, because all of your pertinent content is visible even without the images. This chart below just shows you which email clients block images automatically, as well as which ones render alt text. Most email does render alt text. You'll see that some of the Outlooks do not, and as we know, a lot of people use Outlook. So you can't rely totally on alt text, which is why I said, yes, put a call to action in a button, but also make sure you reiterate it in HTML, because there are going to be some people that don't see that alt text. So with the click, now that we've got people to read and be interested and care about this message, with the click, you want to be really clear on your call to action. And I know I've said that in the subject line, in the pre-header, but really your call to action is the reason that you're sending this email. So it's really important that you make it clear to the recipient what you want them to do. And that means having one clear call to action. Don't have, look at our research, look at our products, visit our social media, contact a rep. That's too many options. You want to drive people to the one thing that you want them to do. So your call to action needs to answer, what do you want me to do? And here's, several buttons that really clearly and simply say what it is that you should do. You should sign up. You should renew. You should request a quote. You should download a white paper. It's really clear and simple. Why do you want me to do it? And that's where some of the supporting evidence that we talked about in the body copy comes in. And then what's going to happen next? Basically, what am I going to get out of it? What's the benefit of me taking this action that you're asking me to take? In text, we want to avoid click here. It's a spam trigger, so that's one good reason to avoid it. But also, people are smart and savvy enough now to know that an underline or an image is going to link them somewhere. So you still want to ask for the click, but you want to be a little more creative than click here. And in this text is where you can answer some of those questions from the previous screen. What's in it for me and what's going to happen next? So sign up to receive our newsletter. I want you to sign up, and you're going to get a newsletter for it. If you order by July 1st, you're going to get free shipping. So that's just a much more compelling use of text than click here, and it also will help you avoid some of those spam triggers. So here's a sample message that was written using that outline that we went over earlier. And you'll see that our call to action is pretty clear and prominent, and it's near the top. So there, request a quote. And we've also included in there by May 14th, and you'll receive 20% off. So what catches my eye is a request a quote, and then I've got some supporting content next to it. I'm going to repeat my call to action, and I've done that in a button, a big blue button that's going to be easy for mobile people to click on and easy for desktop people to see, even if they don't download the image. That's a pretty big spot that's going to have alt text. And then I'm going to reiterate my offer down here at the bottom. Request a no obligation quote. Again, I say May 14th and 20% off. So I've answered what it is that I want someone to do and why they should do it, and given them a deadline to take action. So this is a sample of an email that was sent in by an audience member. And you'll see this was received on a desktop computer, and so the images are blocked. They've used alt text, which is good. And the alt text does say that they're inviting me to a symposium and that it's on Common Core. So that's good. You've told me why. You've used some buzzwords. So that's good. But I'm missing kind of the compellingness of the headline. It's really not as compelling, that alt text, as that red headline that we had from the Agile email or any other kind of headline. Headline in HTML. So what we would recommend with this is that you keep the cute little girl an image and keep her on the right, and then recreate that left side rather than as an image, but as HTML text. You could still have the logo as an image that invites you to be our guest, teaching children to read. That should all be HTML text so that when I open this message, I automatically see it. Things aren't advancing, sorry. I'd mentioned the alt text. You also want to make sure that it's in that call to action button. So the call to action is RSVP, but that's hidden when I got this message. So even though you've invited me to a symposium, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with that, because the alt text on the RSVP is blocked. Moving down into the message, we kind of see a little more information than is actually needed in an email. Again, you've got 3 to 5 seconds, so you need to get to the point really quickly. And so in this one, we've got full bios of the speakers. We've got the schedule. We would typically maybe include the photo and the name and the title of the speaker, but link to a landing page with the bio, just to shorten that left column. While the schedule may be interesting, it actually doesn't really tell us anything about this conference. It doesn't tell me what I'm going to learn. It doesn't tell me the benefits of it. So we would recommend not showing the schedule, but rather using some bullet points to talk about what I'm going to learn when I attend this symposium and why I need to be there. And there is a good placement of the call to action there again at the bottom. However, one thing that we noticed is that one of the most compelling things about attending this symposium is that all expenses are paid except for transportation. So that's a benefit that I would move up into the headline, into the body copy, and even as part of the call to action. You know, there's no cost to attend, it's complimentary, it's free, whatever language you want to use. But that really important benefit is way hidden in the bottom of this message that most people are not going to see because they're not going to scroll down through this message. This is another example of a message sent in to us, and this one's a plain text message or a plain Jane message, which can be very effective, particularly when paired with personalization. So what we would say in this one is maybe adding in something like, "Hi, Joe," or, "Joe, I'd like to talk to you about an exciting new student achievement platform," so that the language and the personalization really make it seem like it came from Chris, the outreach coordinator, that it's not just a generic message that Chris hit send on, but that this message was really meant for me, Joe. So these plainer text messages are a really good place to integrate personalization to boost response. You still want to follow the same basic structure that was outlined before. So you want to include multiple links. You want to state your call to action clearly and with several times, giving people options on how to respond. So this email is asking people to request more information by phone or by email. And a lot of people will respond to that, including a phone number can be a very effective way to drive response. But a lot of people are a little shy or a little hesitant and want to do some research on their own. So we really recommend always including links to a landing page as well. So perhaps linking mileposts up here at the beginning and maybe again even here so that people can click and learn more about mileposts and get themselves familiar before they reach out to that salesperson. And again, as I said, we want to make sure to state the call to action early, be clear, and repeat it. So wrapping up our click discussion, Agile recently did a survey to nearly 1,000 K-12 classroom teachers, asking them some questions about email marketing. And one of the things that came out of it was the offers that they like best and are most likely to respond to. Now these all are kind of commerce driven, but they're interesting even for those of us who aren't necessarily selling the product that someone's going to click and purchase. So these are in ranked order, with the most popular being give me a big fat discount off one item. And then interestingly, the least popular out of this list is the free premium or gift with order. So people out there, which is not surprising among educators, is they're really looking for money off. Excuse me, something to save them money, whether that's free shipping or a buy one, get one free. And the free gift is not so enticing. So that's relevant even for things like signing up for a webinar or requesting a demo, is that maybe these premiums are not as enticing as we might imagine. So even if you're not selling something directly through email but wanting to get the demo or the things like that, kind of testing whether giving an offer for a gift certificate or a gift or whatever helps drive response versus just saying, hey, contact me for a demo. That's a good thing to test. So moving on to conversion, which actually happens post-email, but what happens in your email drives that conversion. You want to make sure that your email content and your landing page content are really aligned, both in the text that you're sharing, your call to action, as well as your visuals, so that people feel like they've landed in the right place, they know what to do, and that it's easy to accomplish. We learned in last month's webinar that was focused on landing pages that it's really important to basically provide the information that's been promised in the email. So if my email is talking about a math app, you need to send me to a landing page that gives me even more information on that math app and maybe a demo or screenshot, something like that. Don't send me to a general product page or a home page where I'm going to have to dig around to find information about what you told me you were going to tell me in the email. You want to make it really simple and straightforward for people to learn what they need to and fulfill your call to action, which may be purchase, sign up, download the white paper, whatever that is. Make it really easy. Okay, so we've pretty much finished up with the effective strategies for your email. So we're going to touch on a couple things in the last minutes that we have. The first being the code that's behind your email. So I mentioned back in spam triggers that sloppy code is a trigger. So you want to do good coding, not from Microsoft Word. And another thing that you don't want to do, which we run into a lot, is that you don't want to code an email like a web page. And this happens a lot because in many companies, the person who handles our website is also the person who's tasked with programming our emails. But what works for a website does not work for an email. You have to code an email like it's 1999. You can't do any of the fun, cool stuff that's being done on web pages in email, and this can be very frustrating for programmers. So rather than using div tags, we still use tables in emails. Websites absolutely shun tables, but they're still what works in email. Inline coding versus style sheets, keeping your styles within tags like a TD tag or a paragraph tag or a font tag. These are all requirements that no longer happen on a website, but absolutely must be done to make your email look good across most browsers. The best way to figure out if your email is going to look good across all browsers and that you've done good coding is to use one of these two services, Email on Acid or Litmus. Underscore and Agile use both of these services, and they're a great way to test your email across dozens of different email browsers and devices to see how it renders. So you can load your beautifully coded email into either of these systems and see how it's going to look in Outlook versus Gmail versus on an iPhone versus an iPad versus an Android device. So these are two really, really useful services. And again, if you work with Underscore, we automatically do this for you, so you wouldn't have to get your own subscription. And Agile also provides a similar service. And my final word on coding is that, as I said, programmers kind of have to live in the past when they program an email, and that can be frustrating for them. And designers kind of have to resign themselves to the fact that the email is not going to look perfect across every single browser. That font sizes and line heights and even colors can render slightly differently across browsers, even though we do our best to code them perfectly. So unfortunately, email is really an exercise in having to live with imperfection. You want to try to get a happy medium across as many browsers as possible, but it's not going to be perfect like a print ad or a print brochure. So moving on to kind of the impact that mobile is having on email marketing. As you can see, email is the #1 activity that's done on smartphones at 78%. And from Agile's own tracking of email campaigns sent to their educator file February through May of this year, you'll see that it ranges from 37% to as high as 55% of educators opening emails on mobile devices. So we definitely can't ignore mobile in the education space. We might have lagged a little behind the consumer market, but educators are definitely opening and reading emails on their mobile devices. So it's important to start to craft your messages with that in mind. Here's some additional stats on email and mobile. And the thing that I actually find most interesting about these is the large number of people who first get an email on their phone or tablet, and then they save it, open it again later on a desktop computer, and then potentially take action. You can see here in that last stat that 65% of people who first get the email on a mobile device and then open it again on a computer are more likely to click through. So we need to make our messages really effective on a mobile device as well as on a desktop device. And with everything email, there's no standard. How an iPhone handles an email is different than how an Android handles an email, and obviously the tablets work differently too. So again, you're trying to get things to work and look as best as possible across a lot of different devices and browsers. You've got 3 options for how to deal with mobile. You can be mobile aware, which is by far the most simple way to handle mobile, and yet it's effective. And when you're mobile aware, you want to resize your images down from the tip, or your the width of your email down from the typical 600 pixels to anywhere between 320 and 500 pixels. So maybe around 400 pixels, which makes it quite a bit skinnier than your standard 600 pixel email, but that will fit better on most smartphones. You'll want to keep your call to action in the upper left corner, and you'll want to make it very clear. Sticking with a single column design is best for mobile. using larger fonts because, again, we're in a smaller environment, so 14 pixels or higher and a line height of 150% or more, and using those finger-friendly buttons. So that doesn't require any special coding or knowledge, but it's just being aware that your message may be opened and responded to on a mobile device. The next option is to be mobile-friendly using fluid design and programming. And that's basically a programming technique that sets your tables, because again, we're using tables, not div tags, is setting your tables at 100% rather than a fixed width. So the email is automatically going to resize based on the size of the screen. The drawback for that is that it can really stretch your content out, as you see on this 1166 view. You know, it just makes for long lines. Your images might be all the way over to the right. In this pretty simple message from Salesforce, it's not bad. It's fairly effective, but you do need to think about your design and how it's going to look if it stretches to 3 times the size that you potentially envisioned it being. But fluid is pretty easy for people to do in terms of programming, and it is a good way to adjust your message to a screen size. And then your final option, which I call mobile friendliest, is doing responsive design and programming. Probably most of you have that for your website. And basically, your entire site resizes and shifts based on the size of the device that it's viewed on. And this is true with emails, too. You'll see in this example that on the smaller screen size, the image moves down below the button instead of being to the right. And that's coding that does that. You can also do things like have different font sizes based on the screen size, switch out images based on the screen size, hide images entirely if you don't want them to show up on the mobile device. So you can do a lot of stuff, but it does require some more advanced programming skill. It uses media queries, which are included in a style sheet. And so the drawback on that is some of your older mobile devices, particularly Android devices, strip out style sheets. And so even though you've coded it to be responsive on a mobile device, some of those older Android devices might not play nicely with it. So that is by far the most effective, yet it does require a little more investment of time and skill to make happen. So we're going to wrap up quickly now with what the future holds for email marketing. One thing you may have heard about is that Google now automatically loads images to their Gmail web program after they've cached and scanned them for viruses. So what this means is that we're potentially entering an environment where we're going to be free to use more images. They're still blocked across most email browsers, as you saw from that chart earlier. But Google and Gmail tend to be kind of the bellwethers of email marketing and other things online. So if they've moved in this direction, it's likely that the other email browsers and programs will follow suit. But right now, Gmail is the primary one that's automatically downloading images. So if you know you have a wide audience of recipients opening on Gmail, then you could be a little more free to use images and rely on them to convey your message. But I would say do that cautiously because you're still going to run into a lot of blocked images. The other thing that Google's done recently, back in March, is introduced a Pinterest-like layout on the Promotions tab. This has been rolled out to a very limited number of users, but again, like with all things Google, they're going to roll it out slowly, and then eventually it will likely become a part of everybody's Gmail inbox. So the thing that we need to think about and start being aware of here is that your sender name and your subject line and one image are really going to become the key to getting opened in this layout. So it's got the big image, the from name there, good eggs, and then the little text is the subject line. The sender image, which is that little oval on the right side, that image is actually pulled from a company's Google Plus page. So it's going to be important that companies have Google Plus in order for this to render properly. Additional HTML code is required to specify the featured image, but our friends at Litmus have created a free code generator, which we've linked to here. And you would fill out the form that Litmus offers, it spits out the code, and you just plop it into your email. And it's going to do what Google needs it to do to render in this new format. So what it means, which I've touched on a little bit, is that you're going to need to have a Google Plus company page so that your profile picture gets pulled. If you don't have that, it's just going to generically pull the first letter of your company and put it there, like in this example. And if you don't specify a featured image, it's just going to put, it may randomly pick an image that you don't particularly want to have, or it may keep it blank, as in this example. So as we move towards this format, potentially with Gmail and other email clients, we're going to need to start to do some additional coding and be aware of how this renders in that format. And then finally, we may be entering an era of more creativity and interaction with emails. More email clients than ever are accepting embedded video and audio and running those smoothly. This example from AT&T, which you may have seen, is pretty cool, but when I get this email in my inbox, the video is actually playing on the smartphone here. And there's audio and music and things happening. So that is something that we can start to look to. 61% of clients accepting it is pretty high, and the number now starting to accept live Twitter and Facebook feeds is increasing as well. There are services like the one that I've put here, videoemail.com, that can help you write the right code to make this work as effectively as possible. Video email is a great service because not only will it give you the code to make the video work as best as possible across all the email browsers, it also has code embedded that provides a static version when it detects that your email doesn't accept the video and the audio, so that those people can still have a good experience as well. So these are some things that we can hopefully look forward to and giving us a little more creativity and freedom in our emails. To wrap up, as you can see from all we've been through, there's a lot to think about when putting together an email. It's not just writing a quick message and putting send. If you really want to get good results, then you really need to think about everything from that open to the conversion and everything that happens in between, and really be thinking about the user experience and ways to get people to respond. So to say for the 100th time, testing is really the best way to go. Just test everything from your subject lines and your from lines to your call to action and landing pages, and really start to see what works for each segment of your audience. Agile is a great resource for helping you improve your email response, and of course we here at Underscore can help you with everything from just message consulting to the full copywriting, design, and programming of your email campaigns. So I know we don't have too many minutes left for questions, but I'm happy to take a few in the time that we've got left.
Well, thank you, Emily, for reviewing all these email best practices and tips for email marketing success. I have gotten a few really good questions in, so I want to get right to it. Just for any questions that we don't get to, either Emily or I will follow up with you following the webinar. You had mentioned avoiding company and product names in the subject line. What about the name of your app? You had said math app a few times. If it's something more specific, would you recommend using that in the subject line?
If it's a really popular app that people are going to know the name of, then there could be some benefit of that. If you're just using this app and trying to get people to try it or get to know about it, then I would really stick with the what is the app versus the name of the app.
Okay. Another question came in also related to the subject line, and that is using question marks or other punctuation that's maybe not an alpha or number character. Does using punctuation increase the spam score in your subject line?
No, using multiple ones, like the example of all those exclamation points or multiple question marks, that will be a spam trigger, but a single question mark or a comma or a hyphen is not going to automatically put you in a spam filter.
Okay, and another question regarding pre-headers. Maybe we can answer this last question here. Is the pre-header only for mobile devices or web browser audience use, or does any email browser see a pre-header?
Whatever email browser that email is delivered to, you'll see that pre-header text. It's not hidden on a desktop or laptop view of it, so it's just up there. I can see if I can scroll back quickly. The effectiveness is really for those mobile and the webmail users. It doesn't add a whole lot, I don't think. Sorry while I'm clicking. here we go, to the desktop experience. I mean, it's up here. This is, again, a desktop screenshot. So you'll see low-cost protection for your school's mobile devices. So it's not hurting, but it's not driving opens in the way that it does on a mobile or in that Gmail inbox.
Gotcha. And then really, really quickly, this was another really good question. If you're planning a monthly campaign with a similar call to action each month, would you recommend changing up your design month to month or keeping it consistent? Which do you find would work better?
That is a very good question. I would definitely say you want different subject lines. I would say having a similar overall design and layout is okay and can help to start building brand and consistency. But you want to have enough different that folks are not just going to start to tune out every single month when they see the same thing. So even though it may be the same kind of design structure, again, in this example, we might switch out this photo each month. We might even just flip out, reverse these colors or something just to keep it a little fresher. So you could make some pretty minor design changes but keep with your overall layout so that people get that familiarity but also know, oh, this is something new for me to look at.
That makes sense. Well, we have gone over by a minute or two here, so I just wanted to thank you again, Emily, for sharing your wonderful expertise with us today. And a reminder to all of our attendees that we'll send an email later today or tomorrow that includes a link to view the recording of today's webinar. And when you log off today, you will be prompted to answer just a few questions. If you could take a few minutes to provide your feedback on today's program, its content, and if you have any suggestions for future webinars, we would sure appreciate it. Again, and also keep your eye out for information about our next webinar coming up on August 20th. We'll have a copywriter and marketing expert, Barry Feldman, with us to talk about how to create content that gets downloaded, read, and shared. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.